The number of passengers using Kelowna International Airport was a record in 2017, and the growth rate seems to be, well, taking off. Today, we'll meet the man who oversees YLW and find out what those numbers mean and what the future holds. Airport Director Sam Samaddar will answer those questions and much more today on Upfront. And welcome, Sam, to Upfront. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure to be here.
Now, before we get to these fantastic numbers you've got for 2017, let's just talk a little bit about you at first. You were born in England and you spent some time in Kenya. Maybe just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I was born in Bristol, England. My parents were in medical school at the time. And I got the bug for aviation at a very young age because I flew at 2 months, believe it or not, intercontinentally to Africa, to Kenya, to be with my grandparents. And so I spent my early youth in Africa, a place called Kisumu, on Lake Victoria, and had a tremendous childhood there, and got into aviation very, very early in my life.
Okay. Now, how did you end up in Canada and sort of really get into working in the aviation industry?
Yeah. Well, so our family left in 1972 when Idi Amin was doing his thing in Uganda, and we ended up in Ontario. And in my early youth, as a teenager, I actually joined Air Cadets.
Okay.
And so at 12, got involved in the interest of flying.
Now, why did you choose that field? What was it about it that really sort of sparked your interest?
Well, my goal was really to become a fighter pilot at the end of the day. And I remember at 15 doing my first flight medical and realizing I was partially colorblind.
Okay.
And that put an end. It was a hard hit to take, but I was able to get my private pilot's license.
Okay.
And then had to retool in terms of what was I going to do. So ended up going to university in Ontario.
Okay. And how did you end up in Vancouver and I guess starting to work in the aviation industry?
Yeah. Before Ontario, as I finished my university in Ontario, I actually went to Vancouver, and I got an opportunity working with external affairs. We were actually involved in heading up Canada's major summits across the country. And Vancouver got to see me in action as we were landing world leaders at the airport in Vancouver. Okay. And the opportunity came up to work at that airport.
Now, in 1992, you became the superintendent of airport operations in Kelowna.
I did.
Talk about that shift, and I guess that was the beginning of your career here.
Yeah, the opportunity here in Kelowna really became as a consequence of a very, very small ad. Okay. And the opportunity here is, as you work at a smaller airport, you get to understand a lot more of the different aspects of running an airport. And so as I started my job in operations, at the time managing the operations, I then got on to different jobs here at this airport.
Airport director in 2008. Maybe talk about why do you think you were chosen for that?
Well, I think I've built up the time in learning the different aspects of running an airport. But I think the biggest part of this job is really about collaboration. It's about seeing the different opportunities that you have as you connect, whether it's an airline, whether it's the business where we have KF Aerospace, for example, and then working with the community where you have different business interests, whether they're technical in nature, such as the IT side or the tourism side, and it's really bringing that whole group of businesses together in terms of a collaborative way to continue to grow this airport.
It sounds like a busy and challenging job, though. I mean, 24/7 kind of thing, is it? Or?
It is. I mean, it has very many moving parts to it. It's like running a small city. And of course, aviation in itself is in the forefront of technology. So the one thing about our business is that it's always changing. And so you're always looking at what's over that horizon and what are the things that you can do better to improve your facility.
Now, you're also on the board of Tourism Kelowna and the Central Okanagan Economic Development Commission. Talk about how you integrate those roles and I guess talk to the other members to I guess help each other and drive traffic at the airport.
You know, it's about networking in part. It's about getting the message out about other services that we have and also what we're trying to build. And so as we build new air service, it's very, very important to be able to get bums in those seats. There's a huge investment by the airlines on that aspect. And so by working with the community, we're actually able to provide or tell the community the services that are available, and connect the business community, the tourism community, to those aspects.
Okay, well, let's talk about the numbers now, because it's been an exciting year for YLW, and 1.9 million sounds like an awful lot for our airport, and up 9% growth year over year. What's going on here?
Well, there's a number of things. One is if you look at the last 2 years, we've actually grown by 18%.
Okay.
For 2016 and 2017. Through our air service development network, we've actually been able to add 32% capacity in terms of seats over the last 5 years. Yeah. And so that comes from working with our partners within the region in terms of promoting the air service that we have. But it also deals with the models and things that we've set up as an airport. Mm-hmm. What a lot of people probably don't know is that we're actually a low-cost airport. Okay. So when we look at our fees and charges that we charge an airline, mm-hmm. We are amongst the lowest in the country. And airlines have highly mobile assets. Mm-hmm. They look at locations on where they're going to put down their metal. Yep. And so when we're competing with other communities and they look at our fee structure, they look at Kelowna favorably in that regard.
Yeah. How much of an impact did Flair Airlines have on these numbers?
Well, Flair didn't have that much of an impact in the last year because they just got started. Yeah. But an airline like Flair, what it does do is it actually induces the marketplace. Mm-hmm. It brings people into the market that normally would not fly. Okay. Or it adds frequency where mm-hmm. people say, well, I'll only make one trip to Toronto this year. Yeah. Because of the rate structure, they may make 2 or 3 trips. Right. So it adds frequency into the marketplace. And if you go back to 1997, for example, when WestJet first started, they had 5% of the market share. Mm-hmm. But they induced the market. They brought people from driving the Coquihalla mm-hmm. To Vancouver to start flying. And we saw growth rates of 23% and 65% as a consequence of a low-cost carrier at the time, which WestJet brought to the market.
So where are these people coming from then to driving these numbers? Is it Vancouver? Is it Toronto? Edmonton?
Well, it's all over. If I can answer that way. If you look at our domestic market, our biggest domestic markets are Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, mm-hmm. Toronto, and then Winnipeg. And Toronto is a very interesting case because quite a few years ago, we developed a strategy of continuing to develop our relationship with Toronto. Mm-hmm. And we had peak summer, a peak winter market. You're into the largest population center for the country. And developing that relationship in terms of the air service piece and getting our airlines to fly, our goal was to get to year-round service. Mm-hmm. And this summer, you'll actually see 4 daily flights between Toronto and Kelowna, representing over 1,000 seats between Air Canada and WestJet.
And it's, of course, 5 million people just in Toronto, and then, of course, huge connections to anywhere in the world.
Yeah, you get 170 destinations to 180 destinations worldwide. So, our business is about getting people as quickly as we can to their final destination with the fewest number of stops. Yeah. So we can't always get point to point because of the size of our market, but certainly getting to a place like Toronto is huge.
When you break down the numbers and you look at the months, we all know that December is obviously a busy month with Christmas and that kind of thing. August, I think, is your busiest month. And why is that?
Well, we have a large propensity here of what I call visiting family and friends. Mm-hmm. And so we see a lot of that activity in peak summer and peak winter with December. So you have that, and of course we have the tourism aspect of our community, whereas the summer has always traditionally been a very, very strong market as it relates to tourism. And what's really interesting in terms of what's going on here is where we had shoulder periods in April and May as quiet periods. Yeah. Last year, for example, in April, we saw a growth rate of 22%. Wow. So we're seeing those shoulder periods infill, and you look at the wine tourism that's developed, the biking and all those kinds of things are starting to infill the markets. What used to be quiet and shoulder periods in our business.
Now, we're the 11th busiest airport in the nation. We're busier than Saskatoon and Regina, almost Victoria. But somehow, this is the one that bugs me, or I can never understand. How are we busier than Quebec City? I mean, they have 800,000 people there. They probably have a lot of people that like to go to sun destinations in the winter, and they are the capital of the province. How on earth are we beating those guys?
Well, I think, first of all, we are a Four Seasons destination. Right. We have really become a Four Seasons destination, people look at that, that they can come here. And if you look at our winter traffic, for example, right now, we have traffic out of Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane. These are daily flights coming on Air Canada into Vancouver. We're tapping that market with an Airbus. So you'll see on some of those flights, 35, 40% of those flights are skiers, for example, destined for the Okanagan.
So do you work that like a sort of a hitchhike kind of thing? Like they come in at a certain time and then you try to get a flight that, is a little bit after that kind of thing to make it work for them?
We've worked with Air Canada to get a larger aircraft to match the inbound side of that. Same with the outbound, because if we can't bring their skis with them because the airplanes bulk out, they're too small, that's an issue.
Right.
And so again, working very, very closely with our partners, our Big White, Silver Star, Revelstoke Mountain. You can come to the airport at 10:30, 11 o'clock and see those flights. Our concourse is full of skiers right now. And they're being distributed throughout the valley. It's really amazing to see. And so the first quarter of this year, where other markets are quiet, we are actually very, very busy. We come out of Christmas right into January, and of course we have our locals here who want to get some sun, and they're of course heading off to destinations in Mexico.
And the economy's good too, right? That always helps the airline industry. I mean, when the economy's good, people are spending money and traveling, right? So is everybody's air numbers going up?
Well, I think the other piece of Kelowna is that we have a fairly high level of affluence. So when we look at individuals and the number of trips they make, on the average in Canada is about 3.5 trips. We're around 5.5 to 6 trips in a year that people are making. So we've got a greater propensity of people here to travel than you would in some other markets.
Okay. Now, you were only expecting growth of about 3%. You get 9%. How does that, first of all, does that present any challenges?
Well, when we look at our airport master plan, we've projected growth out to 2045. And you will have some downturn in the economy. Seeing these rates of growth are actually phenomenal because they go off the scale on anything that we've certainly projected, and they do produce challenges. They're challenges to our infrastructure, and we know where those hotspots are today. And so some of the work that we're doing is how can we go about planning in terms of developing those facilities. And the challenge for us is maintaining that low-cost airport structure as we continue to grow and build the infrastructure just in time. Because once you build the infrastructure, you've got to maintain it. You can't just mothball it. You've got to maintain it, and there's a fixed cost to that. And
does it mean hiring more people too? I mean, all of a sudden, I better hire some more people.
Those all go hand in hand. You've got to increase your labor force. As part of it, we've got to increase our infrastructure. We have to maintain that infrastructure, and we've been in perpetual, capital programs for many, many years. All
right. Well, we'll take a short break and come back with more on the future at YLW. Joining us today is Sam Samaddar, the airport director. Welcome back to Upfront with Airport Director Sam Samaddar from Kelowna International Airport. And Sam, we've talked about the past, what a great year you had. Let's talk a little bit about the future and where is this airport going? Now, my first understanding is you're going to once again look at the departure lounge and make some changes there. What are we looking at?
So in terms of development, we know that we have some areas that we have to increase capacity on. So the departure room is one of those areas that it certainly we need to add more capacity. Pre-board screening is another part of that process that we want to try and get more people through as traffic goes through at a fairly reasonable time. So up front, really, we're going to hit with is those two areas in particular. And then later phases, we're looking at the arrivals area. So the domestic and international arrivals area, again, is certainly hitting its capacity.
What are we looking at for the departure lounge in terms of a timetable and maybe what we could expect to see in there?
We're going through some design at this point, getting some broader concepts together. We're hoping to be in the ground by 2020. And so it could take a couple of years to finish that off. But we're really changing some of the processes that we've previously used to really look at reducing or the walking distances around from arriving off coming off an aircraft
Right.
into the domestic arrivals, for example.
And this is always a challenge at airports, isn't it, to build something or expand something, because you need to continue to operate at the same time, right? So that presents all kinds of, I guess, issues, right?
It is a real challenge, and it's what kind of investment do you make? How big do you make
Yeah.
it? So again, we're trying to balance those two things. Again, trying to maintain our economical airport model
Yeah.
in the middle of it. But one of the major changes the public will see in this design is that we're actually moving domestic arrivals from the north end of the airport to the south end of the airport.
Oh, okay.
So you don't have to walk down that airside corridor.
Right.
You'll connect directly off the airplane down into domestic arrivals.
Okay. I want to ask you about a cell phone park and wait, because I did this in Calgary once, where you just arrive and you text your buddy who's in a parking lot waiting for you and just zips in and picks you up. Is that
Right.
something maybe we could see at YLW?
It's already here.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. So as you come into the airport, you've seen the airport plaza development with the coffee shop
Yeah.
and that there. You just make a right-hand turn there. There's a cell phone
Oh, okay.
lot right there, and you can
I didn't know
go and use the concession while you're at it. So
Okay,
so we have it.
Right on. Now, when you think about things like that and you see some ideas in other airports, is that sort of a way that you guys operate? You say, oh, wow, I saw this great idea in Calgary or wherever, and say, maybe we could institute that here.
We're always looking to steal ideas from other airports.
Yeah.
We do that on a regular basis from each
sure.
other. But really what's happening in our business is, the way we process passengers and baggage through the airport is really, really changing.
Yeah.
And it's changing very, very quickly because of technology. So the most immediate thing that we're working on is something called self-serve bag drop, where you can check in at home, print your boarding card and also your bag tags, and then
Yeah.
drop it off on your own at a self-serve baggage drop
Okay.
position.
That sounds interesting. What about sky bridges? That's something passengers love, and they don't really like to go outside in the elements, and maybe they have a disability, for example. Maybe
Right.
just talk about, and they're not cheap, I imagine.
They're very, very expensive.
Yeah.
They cost over $1 million a piece to do, but we are looking at adding some more loading bridges. And again, as you get the population ages, we have to look at what are the things that we're doing to reduce barriers for people to travel in and out of the airport.
Do you have, what kinds of things do passengers ask for? Do you have a suggestion box, for example? I mean, are people telling you, hey, you need this? Or
We do. I think the number one, and you can probably relate to this, is your Wi-Fi is terrible at the airport.
Yeah.
So, and I tend to agree. I mean, the technology has changed so much. So,
Yeah.
so the immediate thing we're working on is certainly improving the connectivity through Wi-Fi, just because of the devices have changed. You have the airlines that have moved away from entertainment systems on board the aircraft.
Right.
And so you're
There's
bringing
a
on
move
your
there,
own,
isn't
loading
there?
your own.
They want to get rid of the
TVs are
videos.
basically going to be gone.
Yeah.
They're phasing that all out. So
Okay.
it's your personal device that you use on board. So people are madly loading movies and things before they get on board the airplane. So Wi-Fi certainly is one of the ones that we need to deal with right away. From a traveler perspective, the public are always looking for more destinations.
Yeah.
And of course, we continue to work on that, and of course, more food and beverage and concessions.
For sure,
Again,
yeah.
it's a function of, as a growing airport, you can add more food and beverage as you have more people.
Yeah. Now, what about areas that passengers may not necessarily see or understand, like the apron, the taxiways, the air traffic controller? Are you guys
There's
changes there?
a number of advancements. Airports are very, very capitally intensive pieces of infrastructure. And so we have to maintain things like aprons and taxiways. The aircraft are getting bigger, higher pavement load pressures and things like that, so we have to maintain that. But some of the things that we're doing, working with our partners such as NAV Canada and the airlines, we've got approaches into the airport using radio navigation and GPS. And the advantage of that is that you can go from cruising altitude, idle thrust, curvatures in the approaches to the runway without having to power up, power down, and those kinds of things. So there's advances in technology. We're actually adding better approach lighting. So under low visibility conditions, it's better from a safety perspective for the pilot in terms of getting continuity with the runway.
Okay.
And then we will continue to add more taxiway infrastructure to really open up more land that's on the east side of the airfield for private development.
Okay, now speaking of the runway, in 2008 it got extended. This gives you the ability to take, for example, direct flights from Europe. We haven't seen that yet. Are we just waiting for an airline, for example, to say, well, maybe we should do direct Frankfurt, Kelowna, or London, for example?
Yeah. What we do as an airport is we develop a number of different business plans, and we study very, very carefully the amount of traffic on a specific route. We also know that we'll actually induce traffic once you develop a specific route.
Yeah.
And so we use that data to present that to a number of different airlines, which is what we have been doing for some 5 years now, in terms of developing those services. So Europe is one that we continue to pursue. The other idea that we've come up with is how about Reykjavik? So that you stay out of the pressure of Europe in terms of traffic, but stopping in Reykjavik, and you can make it a 2-day stopover or 4-day stopover, and then head into Europe from there, because you can disperse from Reykjavik quite well into the rest of Europe.
We used to have Vegas, and we briefly had San Fran and LAX. You don't have those anymore. Could they possibly come back? Or
yeah, the loss of Vegas and really LA was not because of the business side of it. We've got passenger traffic. In fact, if we look at our numbers, is we have Vegas actually is our largest market into the U.S., followed by LA as number 2. So it's really about looking at a number of airlines to say, let's get back onto this one, and it's one that we need to pursue. And we know from a business perspective, LA is very, very attractive with our high-tech sector, let alone our tourism side of it. And so that is an opportunity that we want to continue to pursue and try and resurrect moving forward.
Now, let's talk about some possible destinations, and you don't have to name them all if you don't want to. You mentioned Iceland, but is it possible? Is there some exciting ones out there maybe that we're looking at, the Kelowna Direct somewhere?
Well, let me give you, I mean, when we look at our travel, we look at regionally, first of all. We want to drive the economy of BC and Alberta when we look at that. So one of the ones that come to us that we are pursuing is Comox. Comox, Mid-Island, we know, traveling by ground with the ferries can be difficult. But getting to Mid-Island is something that would be very, very positive. I know our Victoria service with both WestJet and Pacific Coastal has done very, very well. And so that's an opportunity, as I'd say, close in. When you look beyond that, one of the areas that we're looking at is if you want to get to the east coast of North America, especially the U.S. If you're trying to go through Seattle, you're usually making 2 connections, and it's an all-day travel. So we're looking at Minneapolis, St. Paul, for example.
Okay, that's a big hub for.
And you can get into South America quite much easier than you can, say, going through Seattle, for example. So that's an opportunity that we see. That we want to continue to pursue. And
with American Airlines, for example, as opposed to the Canadian?
Most likely in American, it's Delta's hub. And certainly Delta would be an opportunity to pursue on that route.
Let's talk a little bit about the Shadow Ridge Golf Course. The property that was bought by the city of Kelowna fairly recently. Can you tell us how that fits in with your maybe longer-term plans, or now that your growth rate is so high that maybe those long-term plans are shortening a little bit?
The purchase of the golf course was really a long-term vision to make sure that the airport had land to develop, and especially the air terminal complex itself. So our intention right now is we've signed an agreement with a golf operator for 5 years to operate the golf course on our behalf. And what we'll do is evaluate it in 5 years and see where we're at in terms of the development of that land.
What could we see on there, for example, at the south end of the airport?
Well, there are a number of things that we've done. There's the extension of the runway again, in case we need that. That's been developed. There's the taxiway system that will be required along with that. And then we're going to continue to need to expand servicing areas for the ground equipment. That supports aircraft operations, and also we're going to need more aircraft operational stands. Based on our master plan, we're going to need 6 more aircraft op stands when we look at the life of the master plan out to 2045.
Let's talk about that master plan a little bit. This is something you guys have been working on for a while, and You're expecting 3.5 million visitors
Yes.
annually at that point. But with the way the growth's going, is that throwing that all out of whack? Or
Well, it looks like that right now, but
Yeah.
you know, again, master plans are long-range forecasting,
Right.
and we know we're going to have some economic downturns. There are things going to happen in the world that will face some downturns. So we know when we did the 2025 master plan, I think we ended up being about a year ahead of schedule of hitting 1.6 million.
Okay.
So they're very, very valuable planning tools, and ensuring that we don't put infrastructure in the wrong place as we continue to build out the airport, because of course infrastructure is very, very expensive to replace.
Yeah.
So it is a very valid, very valuable planning tool, and it deals with things like purchasing of land to make sure that you're supporting the future build out of the airport,
Yeah.
and you're thinking that long-term vision.
Now, YLW is the largest municipally owned airport in
Yes.
Canada. What does that mean? Is that an advantage, for example?
Well, you know, we're the only national airport in the country that's run by a municipality, and I think that's a feather in the cap for the municipality itself. This community, way back in 1946, and I've read the business briefs that were established, and the airport of the day at that time was Penticton. And the community at the time said, you know, if we wanted to be a community of reckoning, it had to have its own airport. And it went through a public vote, passed by 6 votes, that developed what is now Kelowna International Airport. It was a tobacco farm called Dixon Ranch that was purchased for $20,000. But that's the foresight this community's had over time. You know, the political leadership, the business leadership have made significant investments in the airport, timely investments that has allowed the airport to continue to grow the way it has.
I want to talk a little bit about all the development that's going on around the airport, outside of the airport lands. I mean, we've seen a significant amount there, hotels and all kinds of stores and stuff.
Yes.
What's your take on that?
Well, you know, there's a synergy that happens as you build the airport, and then you've got the university, of course, that comes along with that. That there's a synergy with the industrial land that's at the airport that needs to support the airport, or the airport needs that support from those lands. So the north end of town has certainly become a place of reckoning. I don't think people know that hotel is actually the highest occupancy hotel in all of Kelowna.
Wow.
And you know, you have people that are traveling quite a distance for early morning departures, so they'll overnight there.
Yep.
And they may arrive late at night, and then of course have to travel the next day.
Okay.
Stiff distance.
Now, we're almost out of time, but I want to ask you a little bit about the legalization of marijuana and how that
Yes.
affects airports. Maybe just tell us what that means for passengers, and then, for example, could we even see a marijuana store at a YLW if it's legal?
Well, you know, it's already in place in terms of how we deal with it, because it's obviously prevalent out there. So the restriction in terms of what you take with you is 1 liter.
Yeah.
And you declare it in advance, and really the way you go. So what you do need to understand is where you're traveling to. So if you're within Canada, you're going to be fine. But if you're traveling beyond that, understand the jurisdiction you're going to.
So it's up to the passenger.
You need to understand that,
Yeah.
absolutely. So.
Yeah. And possibly a store there?
Well, you know, we run all kinds of different concessions and
Yeah.
retail. So maybe once it becomes commercialized, maybe there'll be an opportunity at the airport to sell it.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us today on Upfront.
Thank you for having me.